Some memories never fade. They have fur, bright eyes, and the gift of loving us without saying a word. Because every dog carries a story, and maybe a part of yours. Get ready to discover more than a breed. Discover a lifelong companion.
Moscow, October 1957. The world still resonates with the beep, beep, beep of Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite that had departed from Earth just 1 month before. In the snow-covered streets of the Soviet capital, people look up at the sky with a mixture of pride and amazement. But in the secret laboratories of the Soviet space program, a new mission is already underway, one that would touch hearts around the world and forever change our relationship with space exploration. Among the frozen corridors of the Institute of Aeronautical and Space Medicine, a small dog with brown and white fur was about to become the most famous creature on Earth. Her name was Laika, the one who barks in Russian, and she had no idea that she was destined to write one of the most exciting and tragic pages in the history of humanity. Laika was born on the unforgiving streets of Moscow, where the Russian winter shows no mercy to the weak. She was a mixed breed of approximately 3 years old, part Siberian Husky and Terrier, weighing only 6 kilograms. Her white and brown coat had grown thick to resist the brutal cold of the Soviet capital, and her brown eyes shone with the intelligence characteristic of street dogs who had learned to survive on their own. It was in late 1956 that Soviet scientists began roaming Moscow's streets in search of special candidates. They weren't looking for purebred dogs or pampered apartment pets. They needed survivors, fighters who had already proven their resistance to the most adverse conditions. Street dogs like Laika had something that no domestic animal could offer: the ability to withstand extreme stress, hunger, cold, and uncertainty. Dr. Vladimir Yazdovsky, head of the Space Biomedical Research Program, had established rigorous selection criteria. The dogs should weigh between 6 and 7 kilograms, be between 2 and 6 years old, be female to facilitate waste management equipment, have light-colored fur to show up better in photographs, and above all, demonstrate calm temperament and sharp intelligence. When the scientists found Laika wandering through a square near downtown Moscow, searching for food scraps in the garbage, something special caught their attention. While other dogs fled from human approach, Laika remained curious but cautious. Her posture indicated superior intelligence, and when one of the researchers extended his hand, she approached slowly, sniffing before allowing a hesitant caress. "This one will do," said Dr. Yazdovsky to his assistant. "She has what we need." Laika was taken to the Institute of Aeronautical and Space Medicine, where she would undergo the most rigorous tests any animal had ever faced. But first, she needed to adapt to a completely different life from what she had known on the streets. In her first days, Laika was distrustful. The regular food, clean water, soft bed, all of this seemed too good to be true for a dog accustomed to fighting for every crumb. The veterinarians and scientists noticed that she observed everything with attention, as if constantly evaluating whether that place was safe or if she would need to escape at any moment. Gradually, however, Laika began to trust her caretakers. Dr. Adelia Kotovskaya, one of the few women in the Soviet space program, developed a special affection for the small astronaut. She had such expressive eyes, she would remember decades later. It seemed like she understood that something important was happening. Laika's training went beyond anything imaginable. Soviet scientists knew they were sending a living being to a completely hostile environment, and every detail needed to be perfect. There was no margin for error. The first challenge was getting Laika accustomed to extreme confinement. The Sputnik 2 capsule would be tiny, little bigger than a washing machine. To simulate these conditions, Laika was placed in progressively smaller cages for increasing periods. Initially, she stayed only a few hours per day. But gradually the time was extended to full days. Seeing that small creature confined like that broke our hearts, a technician involved in the program would confess later. But we knew it was necessary. If she panicked in space, the entire mission would be lost. Laika learned to eat and drink in simulated zero gravity. Her food was transformed into a special gelatinous paste, rich in all necessary nutrients that wouldn't create dangerous floating crumbs for the equipment. Water came from a special automated system. Everything had to be redesigned designed thinking about the unique conditions of space. The stress resistance tests were the most difficult. Laika was subjected to deafening noises that simulated rocket launch, a sound so intense it would make any human faint. She was placed in centrifuges that spun at terrible speeds, simulating the G-forces she would feel during launch. Her blood pressure, heart rate, and brain waves were constantly monitored. Surprisingly, Laika proved exceptional in all phases of training. Where other dogs panicked or refused to cooperate, she remained relatively calm. She seemed to understand, in some mysterious way, that those tests had a greater purpose. Dr. Oleg Gazenko, one of the main program leaders, was impressed by her intelligence. Laika didn't just endure the tests, she excelled at them. It was as if she had been created specifically for this mission. During training, Laika was also introduced to the spacesuit she would wear on the mission. It was a small silver outfit with attached sensors that would monitor her vital signs throughout the journey. It had special openings to allow minimal movement within the tight capsule and a waste collection system that would ensure hygiene during the flight. But perhaps the most touching aspect of training was how Laika responded to the scientists who worked with her. Despite all the stress from the tests, she developed genuine emotional bonds with her team. She wagged her tail when she saw Dr. Yazdovsky arriving in the morning. She licked Dr. Kotovskaya's hand when she came to check on her progress. She seemed to perceive that these people cared about her, even while subjecting her to such difficult ordeals. Sometimes I wondered if we had the right to do that to her, a veterinarian would admit years later. But then I would see her trusting eyes and know that she was with us on this journey. October 1957 was a month of unbearable pressure in the Soviet space program. The success of Sputnik 1 had surprised the world, but Nikita Khrushchev, leader of the Soviet Union, wanted more. Much more. We need something spectacular for the 40th anniversary of the October Revolution, declared Khrushchev during a secret meeting in the Kremlin. Something that shows the world that the Soviet Union is light years ahead of the Americans. Sergei Korolev, the mysterious chief designer of the Soviet space program, his identity was a state secret, knew exactly what this meant. They had only 1 month to prepare a mission that would put a living being in orbit. It would be the definitive demonstration that the Soviets were ready to send humans to space. But 1 month was insufficient time to build a new spacecraft. Korolev's team had to improvise using the basic design of Sputnik 1 as a foundation. Sputnik 2 would be substantially larger, weighing 508 kilograms compared to its predecessor's 83 kilograms, but it would still be a rushed adaptation, not a completely new project. For Laika and her training team, this meant there was no more time for gradual preparation. The final tests were drastically intensified. Laika was subjected to increasingly realistic simulations, including sessions of 20 consecutive days in total confinement. During these prolonged sessions, scientists monitored every aspect of her physical and mental condition. They discovered that Laika developed sophisticated strategies to deal with isolation. She created her own routines, sleeping at regular hours, exercising within the tiny limits of the cage, and even talking to the equipment around her through low, modulated barks. It was impressive to observe how she adapted, reported Dr. Kotovskaya. Laika wasn't just surviving confinement, she was finding ways to make it bearable. Meanwhile, construction of Sputnik 2 advanced at a frantic pace. The spacecraft would be equipped with rudimentary life support systems, fans for air circulation, carbon dioxide absorbers, oxygen generators, and a temperature control system that would keep the capsule interior between 15 and 25 degrees Celsius. But there was a terrible problem that everyone knew, but few dared mention openly. Sputnik 2 had no return system. The technology to bring a spacecraft back to Earth simply didn't exist yet. Laika would be a brave pioneer, but also an inevitable martyr. The scientists developed an official plan that said Laika would be humanely euthanized after 7 days in orbit, when oxygen began to run out. The automated food would be mixed with poison, ensuring a painless death. But even this merciful plan would prove too optimistic. As the launch date approached, the team noticed subtle changes in Laika's behavior. She seemed more attentive, more alert, as if sensing that something monumental was about to happen. During the petting sessions that scientists allowed after the hardest tests, Laika showed more affection, as if trying to absorb every moment of human contact. Dr. Yazdovsky even took Laika to his home on the eve of the launch, allowing her to play with his children and experience, for the last time, what it was like to be just a normal house dog. "I wanted to give her a few hours of simple happiness," he would explain later. "She deserved that." November 3rd, 1957, 5:30 a.m. Moscow time. The Baikonur Cosmodrome was covered by a thin layer of snow, and the wind from the Kazakh steppe cut like ice blades. Under the spotlights illuminating the launch pad, the R-7 rocket rose like a cathedral of metal and dreams, with Sputnik 2 at the top, guarding its precious passenger. Laika had spent the night in a special preparation room, being constantly monitored by the medical team. Her vital signs remained surprisingly stable, considering the stress of the situation. It was as if she had reached a state of determined calm, ready for anything the universe might present. At 6 a.m., the preparation team began the process of putting her in the spacesuit. Laika cooperated completely, allowing technicians to attach sensors that would monitor her heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory movements, and muscle activity. She wore a light chain that allowed her to sit, lie down, or stand within the capsule, but prevented her from turning completely around. Dr. Yazdovsky made a final personal check of all systems. The gelatinous food was loaded for 7 days. Water was in the correct reservoir. The waste removal system worked perfectly. The carbon dioxide absorbers were activated. Everything seemed ready. But when the moment came to close the capsule hatch, something unexpected happened. Laika looked directly into Dr. Yazdovsky's eyes, and for a moment that seemed eternal. There was silent communication between them. It wasn't words, but something deeper, a mutual understanding that they were about to make history together. "Good luck, little Laika," the scientist whispered, giving her head one final caress. "The whole world will be rooting for you." The hatch closed with a definitive click. At 7 a.m., final launch procedures began. In the control center, dozens of engineers and scientists monitored hundreds of instruments, each responsible for a crucial aspect of the mission. Communications with Moscow were constant. Khrushchev wanted minute-by-minute updates. Inside the capsule, Laika remained surprisingly calm. Her heartbeat had increased slightly, but was within normal parameters. She seemed to be exploring her small world with curiosity, sniffing the equipment around her and adjusting to the limits of her confinement. "T-minus 10 minutes and counting," announced the flight controller. In the control center, a tense silence took over the environment. Everyone knew they were about to witness something that would change history forever. The first terrestrial living being was about to leave its home planet. To -1 minute, the R-7's engines began to awaken, filling the air with a growing roar that made the Earth tremble. Inside the capsule, Laika felt the vibrations gradually increasing. Her instincts told her something important was happening, but she showed no fear. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Launch. The moment of launch was beyond anything the scientists could have anticipated. The deafening roar of the R-7's engines transformed the Cosmodrome into a hell of sound and fury. Orange and blue flames poured from the rocket's base as 400 tons of metal and fuel defied Earth's gravity. Inside the small capsule atop this mountain of explosive power, Laika experienced forces no living being had ever felt. The acceleration pressed her against the bottom of the capsule with a force 3 times greater than her own weight. Her heartbeat shot up to 240 beats per minute, triple the normal rate, but she didn't panic. The telemetered data sent back to Earth showed something extraordinary. Despite the extreme physical stress, Laika maintained complete control of her bodily functions. She wasn't just surviving the launch, she was conquering it. "Telemetry normal, vital signs stable," shouted the communications operator over the noise in the control center. "Laika is responding perfectly." 3 minutes after launch, something magical happened. The engines shut off suddenly, and Laika's world transformed completely. The brutal force pushing her down disappeared instantly, replaced by a sensation no terrestrial being had ever experienced: zero gravity. Laika floated gently inside her capsule, held in place only by the light chain around her body. Drops of water from her drinking system floated like small crystal spheres. Particles of her gelatinous food danced slowly through the air. It was a silent and magical cosmic ballet. The cameras inside the capsule recorded every moment of this historic transformation. Laika seemed fascinated rather than frightened by her new condition. She moved her head slowly, observing the floating objects around her with the natural curiosity of a born explorer. First orbit completed successfully, announced the flight controller 103 minutes after launch. Laika is officially in stable orbit around Earth. The news spread around the world like lightning. On Moscow streets, crowds gathered around public loudspeakers to hear updates from Radio Moscow. In Washington, NASA officials worked frantically to understand how the Soviets had achieved such a feat. In London, Paris, Tokyo, and all the world's major cities, newspapers ran headlines about the small dog who had become the most famous being on the planet. But above all this, 200 kilometers high, Laika continued her silent journey around Earth. Every 103 minutes, she completed a full orbit, seeing sunrise and sunset 14 times per day. Through the small windows of her capsule, she had views no living being had ever contemplated: the deep blue of oceans, the brown and green of continents, and white clouds dancing over the planet's surface. Scientists on the ground monitored every aspect of her condition. Her blood pressure had normalized after launch. Her breathing was regular. She could eat and drink normally, even in zero gravity. More impressive still, she seemed to be adapting psychologically to the space environment in remarkable ways. "It's as if she was born for this," commented Dr. Kotovskia while analyzing the telemeter data. Laika isn't just surviving in space, she's flourishing. During the first hours of the mission, Laika was active and alert. She explored her small capsule as much as the chain allowed, investigated her food with interest, and even tried to dig in the air, an instinctive behavior that provoked touching laughter in the control center. But perhaps the most moving moment was when Laika tried to bark to Earth. The microphones picked up her modulated barks, and for a few magical seconds, a dog's voice echoed through the vacuum of space, connecting two worlds in a way that had never existed before. The truth about what really happened to Laika in space remained hidden for decades. For years, the official version maintained by the Soviets was that she had survived for 7 days, sending valuable data about how living organisms could function in the space environment before being humanely euthanized through poisoned food. But the reality was much more tragic and much more complicated. Dr. Dmitry Malyshenkov, one of the scientists who had worked on the project, revealed the devastating truth in 2002 during an international scientific conference. His words echoed like a long-suppressed confession. Laika died due to overheating, probably 5 to 7 hours after launch, much earlier than we announced at the time. There was no possibility of return, and we never planned to recover her. It was a suicide mission from the beginning. Sputnik 2's thermal control system, built in a desperate rush to meet the impossible 1-month deadline, had failed. The thermal insulation proved inadequate, and the temperature inside the capsule rose dangerously during the first hours of flight. The telemeter data showed a tragic story. Initially, Laika was responding well to the challenges of spaceflight. Her heart rate normalized, she was able to eat and drink, and seemed to be adapting to zero gravity. But as hours passed and temperature continued rising, her vital signs began showing extreme stress. "We could see from the data that something was wrong," admitted one of the telemetry operators years later. "The temperature was rising beyond safe limits, but there was nothing we could do. There was no remote control of the cooling system. We could only watch and wait." Laika fought bravely against the impossible conditions. During her final hours of life, she continued responding to automated feeding commands and tried to maintain her normal activities. Sensors recorded that she remained conscious and alert until almost the end, a final demonstration of her extraordinary courage. Her last detectable vital signs transmission was received on Earth at 12:30 p.m. on November 3rd, 1957, approximately 7 hours after launch. After that, silence. But the official lie continued. For days, weeks, and then years, the Soviets maintained the fiction that Laika had survived for a full week in space. They even fabricated false telemetry data to sustain the story. The political pressure to demonstrate technological superiority was so intense that the truth about Laika's fate became a state secret. Dr. Oleg Gazenko, who had been one of the main architects of the animal spaceflight program, carried the weight of this lie for decades. In 1998, shortly before his death, he made a devastating public confession. Working with dogs is stressful. You develop them until you love each one of them. Scientific pursuit required Laika's sacrifice. I regret it. We didn't learn enough from this mission to justify the death of an animal. It was an admission that science had lost its soul in the race for space supremacy. Even believing the official version that Laika had survived for a week in space, the world reacted with a complex mixture of admiration, sadness, and indignation. The small dog had touched something deep in humanity's collective consciousness, the primitive connection between humans and their animal companions. On Moscow's streets, ordinary people stopped strangers to discuss Laika's fate. Many were proud of the Soviet technological achievement, but disturbed by the inevitability of her death. Flowers began appearing spontaneously in city parks, left by children who had heard the story of the little dog of the stars on the radio. The international reaction was even more intense. In London, the National Canine Defence League organised a minute of silence in Laika's memory. Thousands of people gathered in city parks, many accompanied by their own dogs, to honour the space pioneer. In France, the newspaper L'Humanité published a moving editorial titled Laika, Involuntary Heroine. This small dog, who did not choose her destiny, carries with her the hopes and dreams of all humanity. She shows us that exploring the cosmos requires sacrifices that go beyond human understanding. But not all reactions were positive. Animal protection organizations around the world vehemently condemned the use of Laika as a space guinea pig. The Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals in the United Kingdom issued a strong statement. Laika's sacrifice represents a dark milestone in the history of science. No scientific discovery justifies the deliberate suffering of an innocent animal. In the United States, the reaction was particularly complex. On one hand, there was reluctant admiration for the Soviet technological achievement. On the other, there was moral indignation and renewed determination to catch up with the Russians in the space race. NASA immediately announced plans to accelerate its own manned spaceflight program, but using only human volunteers. "We will never sacrifice an innocent animal for political propaganda," declared Dr. Werner von Braun, director of the American space program. It was a not-so-subtle criticism of Soviet methods. Children around the world were especially affected by Laika's story. Letters began arriving en masse at Soviet embassies, many written in childish handwriting, asking about the space puppy's well-being. A letter from an 8-year-old English child captured the sentiment of many. "Dear Mr. Russian, I hope Laika is happy in the stars. Can she see my house from up there? Tell her I have a dog too, and that he's praying for her every night." Artists began creating works inspired by Laika. Poets wrote verses about her lonely journey. Composers created songs in her honor. She became a universal symbol, not just of scientific progress, but of the deep connection between humans and animals. Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who would later win the Nobel Prize in Literature, wrote in his diary, published only decades later, "Laika carries with her not only the dreams of Soviet space conquest, but the moral weight of our ambitions. She is both heroine and victim, pioneer and martyr. In her lonely journey, she mirrors the human condition, small beings lost in the immensity of the cosmos, seeking meaning and connection." As days passed and the Soviets maintained the fiction that Laika was still alive and sending data, worldwide attention intensified. Radio stations dedicated entire programs to discussing her condition. Newspapers published daily editorials about the ethical implications of her mission. When the Soviets finally announced that Laika had been humanely euthanized after 7 days in space, the world entered official mourning. Flags were lowered to half-mast in several cities. Memorial services were organized in parks and public squares. But even in this moment of collective sadness, few imagined the terrible truth that would remain hidden for decades, that Laika had died alone and frightened just a few hours after leaving Earth. Although Laika died much earlier than the world knew at the time, her mission was not in vain. The data collected during her few hours in space provided crucial information that helped make the first human spaceflight possible just 3.5 years later. Yuri Gagarin, the first human in space, always kept a photo of Laika in his office. In interviews, he frequently credited the small pioneer with paving the way for his own historic journey. Laika was the first to prove that a living being could survive launch and travel in space, he said. Without her courage, I would never have flown. The life support systems tested on Laika's mission, from gelatinous food to carbon dioxide absorbers, were refined and perfected for the human missions that followed. Every astronaut who left Earth after 1957 owed, in part, their safety to the data collected during Laika's tragic journey. But Laika's legacy goes far beyond technical contributions. She fundamentally changed how humanity thinks about animals and scientific experimentation. Her death sparked ethical debates that continue today about the moral limits of scientific research and our duties to the other species that share our planet. After the revelation of the truth about her death in 2002, the world reacted with a new wave of emotion. Monuments were erected in her honor in various cities. In Moscow, a bronze statue of Laika was installed near the Military Medicine Institute where she was trained. The sculpture shows the small dog standing on a rocket, looking courageously at the sky, not as a victim, but as the pioneer explorer she truly was. Dr. Yazdovsky, already elderly when the truth was revealed, visited the monument regularly until his death. Witnesses reported that he always brought a small offering, a dog biscuit that he placed silently at the statue's base. It was his personal ritual of seeking forgiveness from the companion he had sent to the stars. In 2008, Russia issued an official postage stamp in Laika's honor, finally recognizing not only her scientific contribution, but also the sacrifice she represented. The stamp image shows Laika inside her space capsule, with Earth shining in the background, a final official tribute to the first four-legged astronaut. Laika's story forced the worldwide scientific community to deeply rethink its ethical practices. Before 1957, the use of animals in experiments was rarely questioned. It was simply accepted as necessary for scientific progress. But Laika's death, broadcast live to the entire world, put a real and emotional face on the cost of scientific research. In the following decades, rigorous protocols were developed to ensure that animals used in space research were treated with the maximum care and respect possible. NASA established animal ethics committees that must approve any experiment involving living beings. The European Space Agency developed even stricter guidelines requiring that non-animal alternatives be explored before any testing with living creatures. More importantly, Laika's story inspired an entire generation of scientists to seek more humane research methods. Dr. Patricia Mitchell, who directed NASA's space medicine program during the Apollo missions, always cited Laika as inspiration for her work. Laika taught us that scientific progress cannot happen at any cost. We have responsibility not only for the results of our research, but also for the methods we use to achieve them. Every animal we use in our experiments deserves the same care and respect we would give to a member of our own family. This philosophy revolutionized not only space research, but animal experimentation in general. Laboratories around the world began implementing the 3 R's of ethical research: replacement, substituting animals with alternatives when possible; reduction, reducing the number of animals used to the minimum necessary; and refinement, refining methods to minimize pain and distress. Today, more than 65 years after her death, Laika continues to inspire people around the world. Her story is told in children's books that teach kids about courage and sacrifice. Documentaries explore the ethical implications of her mission. Artists continue creating works in her honor. At the International Space Station, a small plaque with Laika's image was installed in the Russian section, reminding all astronauts of the small pioneer who opened the way for their own journeys. Astronauts of various nationalities have reported emotional moments when seeing Earth for the first time through the station windows, remembering that Laika was the first to have that extraordinary view. Tim Peake, a British astronaut who spent 6 months on the space station in 2016, wrote in his diary, "When I look at Earth through the space station window, I always think of Laika. She saw this same view, our blue planet suspended in the infinite void of space. But she saw it alone, without the possibility of sharing the experience or returning home. Her loneliness makes our presence here even more precious." Laika's influence can also be seen in the development of modern space robotics. Many engineers cite her story as motivation to create increasingly sophisticated robots that can perform dangerous explorations without putting lives at risk, whether human or animal. Mars rovers, probes exploring the far reaches of the solar system, and satellites studying the distant cosmos are, in a sense, Spiritual descendants of Laika, brave explorers sent to places where living beings cannot go, but without the moral cost of a lost life. Laika's story also forced us to confront deep philosophical questions about our place in the universe and our relationship with other forms of life. She was sent to space without choice, without fully understanding what was happening, but her courage and adaptability demonstrated qualities we consider typically human. French philosopher Emmanuel Levinas wrote a few years after Laika's death, "This small dog confronts us with an uncomfortable truth about our own nature. She demonstrated courage without understanding heroism, sacrifice without choosing martyrdom. In her forced innocence, she mirrors our own cosmic condition, small and vulnerable beings in a vast and indifferent universe, doing the best we can with circumstances we didn't choose." Psychologists have studied for decades the emotional impact of Laika's story on children who grew up hearing about her. Many reported that the first time they truly understood mortality was when they realized that Laika wouldn't return home. Her story became, for many, a gentle but honest introduction to the moral complexities of the adult world. Dr. Sarah Chen, a child psychologist specializing in how children process stories of sacrifice and heroism, observed, "Laika offers a unique narrative for children because she combines elements of exciting space adventure with complex moral realities. She is neither villain nor pure victim. She is something more complicated and more human. This helps children develop more nuanced ethical thinking." Sputnik 2, with Laika's body still aboard, continued orbiting Earth for 162 days after her death. During this time, it completed 2,570 orbits around the planet, traveling more than 100 million kilometers through space. It was as if she continued exploring, even in death. On April 14th, 1958, Sputnik 2's orbit finally decayed enough for Earth's atmosphere to bring it back. The spacecraft disintegrated during re-entry, creating a bright shower of artificial meteors that were seen by observers around the world. Many people interpreted this fiery re-entry as the symbolic return of Laika to Earth. Although her physical body was vaporized by atmospheric friction, her memory and legacy remained very much alive in human consciousness. The moment of her re-entry was observed by astronomers in several countries. Dr. Bernard Lovell, director of the Jodrell Bank Observatory in England, wrote in his records, "At 02:30 GMT, we observed the last vestiges of Sputnik 2 crossing the sky like a bright shooting star. It was impossible not to think of Laika at that moment, a small explorer finally returning home, transformed into pure light crossing the firmament. It was a deeply moving moment for all of us who had followed her during her journey." Groups of stargazers around the world gathered specifically to witness Sputnik 2's re-entry. Many brought their own dogs, creating a silent communion between terrestrial observers and the memory of the space pioneer. Laika's influence can be traced through the decades in countless subtle and profound ways. Each subsequent space mission carried part of her legacy. Every animal used in space research was treated with more care due to the precedent her story established. Valentina Tereshkova, the first woman in space in 1963, always acknowledged her debt to Laika. She was the first female of any species to leave Earth and travel among the stars, said Tereshkova. In a sense, she opened the way not only for men, but specifically for women in space. I carried her memory with me during my own mission. In the 1960s and 1970s, as the space program developed, increasingly rigorous protocols were established to protect animals used in testing. Monkeys, mice, and other animals that flew in space after Laika were treated as precious astronauts with redundant life support systems and carefully planned recovery procedures. Ham, the chimpanzee who flew on the Mercury Redstone 2 mission in 1961, was safely recovered and lived a long and comfortable life in a specialized zoo. His successful mission demonstrated that it was possible to conduct vital space research without sacrificing animal lives, a lesson directly inspired by Laika's tragedy. With the advent of the internet and social media, Laika's story found a new generation of admirers. Memes, Digital art and online tributes kept her memory alive for people born decades after her death. NASA's website continues to list Laika as the first animal astronaut on its educational pages. Millions of students around the world learn about her in science and history classes. Her story has become a standard case study in applied ethics courses at universities. In 2007, on the 50th anniversary of her mission, Google dedicated its Doodle of the Day to Laika, featuring a simple but moving animation of the small dog floating peacefully in space. The doodle was seen by hundreds of millions of people, introducing her story to a new global generation. Game developers have created interactive experiences where players can visit Laika in space, providing a unique emotional connection to her story. While some have criticized these representations as trivializing her tragedy, most were designed with respect and reverence, allowing young people to connect with her story in ways previous generations never could. Digital artists continue creating new interpretations of her journey, from realistic paintings to conceptual abstractions that explore themes of loneliness, sacrifice, and exploration. Her image has become iconic, instantly recognizable even to people who know few details of her actual story. Even today, more than 6 decades after her death, Laika's story continues to raise difficult questions that have no easy answers. Was her mission justified? Was the scientific knowledge gained worth the cost of her life? Would we have reached the same place eventually using more humane methods? Different cultures and societies have reached different conclusions. In Russia, Laika is generally viewed as a national heroine who made a necessary sacrifice for humanity's progress. Official monuments and memories emphasize her courage and historical contribution. In the West, especially in countries with more developed animal rights movements, she is often portrayed more as a martyr than as a heroine, an innocent victim of uncontrolled human ambitions. But perhaps the most nuanced perspective comes from contemporary scientists and ethicists who recognize both her contributions and the moral cost of her mission. Dr. Jane Martinez, a specialist in animal research ethics at Stanford University, offers a balanced view. Laika existed at a unique moment in history when humanity was taking its first hesitant steps beyond our home planet. Today's ethical standards didn't exist then. We cannot judge the decisions of 1957 by the standards of 2024, but we can honor her memory by ensuring that we never again allow political pressure or scientific ambition to override our compassion and moral responsibility to other forms of life. In the silent vastness of space, where Laika spent her final moments, there is no sound, no wind, no national borders. There is only the blue earth slowly rotating below, dotted with white clouds and carved by brown and green continents. It was this view, the first time any terrestrial being saw our planet from outside, that became Laika's final gift to humanity. Not just the scientific data from her mission, but the cosmic perspective she offered us. She showed us how our world truly looks, a precious and fragile oasis suspended in the infinite void. Astronauts frequently report that seeing Earth from space fundamentally changes their perspective on life, politics, and the human condition. They see a planet without borders, where storms and oceans completely ignore the artificial divisions humans create. This overview effect, as psychologists call it, has its roots in Laika's pioneer journey. She was the first to see that we are all passengers on the same small spacecraft, traveling through the cosmos together. Her lonely death in the stars somehow taught us about our shared connection on Earth. Today, when we look at the night sky and see the stars twinkling in the distance, we can remember that once a small brave dog traveled beyond that darkness and sent us a message back. We are all explorers, dreamers, and survivors together in this vast and mysterious universe. Laika taught us that space exploration isn't just about technology or national politics. It's about courage, sacrifice, and the irresistible impulse to discover what exists beyond the horizon. She showed us that even the smallest among us can touch the stars and change history forever. And perhaps somewhere among the planets and distant stars that she helped humanity reach, Laika's spirit is still exploring, still discovering marvels we can only dream of. An eternal pioneer, running free through the infinite cosmos, finally at home among the stars she was the first to visit. Her journey ended in 1957, but her legacy continues flying forever. In every space mission, in every scientific discovery, in every moment we choose compassion over ambition, care over conquest. Laika, the first four-legged astronaut, taught us that even in the loneliest heights of space, we are never truly alone. She didn't return home, but she showed us the way to the stars. In her lonely journey, Laika carried with her all of humanity's dreams and hopes, and in the process taught us the true meaning of courage, sacrifice, and love. This narrative is based on documented historical records from Russian space archives, NASA records, and testimonies from scientists who worked in the Soviet space program. While some dialogues and internal thoughts have been recreated for narrative purposes, all major events and scientific data are historically accurate, as revealed in declassified documents and subsequent confessions from program participants.